Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to those who've just joined us. Great to see you today for today's session. So, we're just giving everyone a couple of seconds to join us in the session. I see the numbers steadily joining. So, great to have you all here with us and welcome to the start of your Monday. As I know for many of you, it's just the beginning of the day. So, I hope you all had a good weekend and are feeling ready to get started with some thinking about gender equality this week. So I think with that, let's get going with today's session. So a big welcome and thank you for joining us. So we're here today for the first of our two-part program on gender equality in capital markets. So as a number of you are already doing, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat as we're getting started. But we've got lots to cover today in our session, so in the interests of time, let's dive straight in. So, from my side, from the UNSSE team, I'm Fiona, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you all today. So, a big thank you to our stock exchange, the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange, for hosting us all here together today. And this program really, it wouldn't be possible without a number of different partners. So, a big thank you as well to the IFC, to UN Women, Columbia University, and the Luxembourg government for their support to help make this training possible. So, to get us started today, I'm delighted to be joined by Eva Mitchell, CEO of TTSE, to kick off our session. So, Eva's been CEO of the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange and also its subsidiary TTCD since 2021, and she brings a wealth of experience in her background from across the financial services sector, including stock market operations, asset management, banking, brokerage, and regulation across the region. So, big thank you, Ava, for joining us, and I'll be passing over to you now for your opening remarks. Thanks very much. Great.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks for that very warm introduction. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, colleagues at the United Nations Sustainable Exchange Initiative, presenters and attendees. And good morning to my Trini peeps, my Caribbean peeps, everyone all over the world that has, embraced this initiative and joined us this morning. I know it's Monday, so we are very, very, very happy to have you. On behalf of the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange Limited, it is my pleasure to warmly welcome you to our first joint webinar with the UN Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative. This morning, it's entitled Gender Equality and Capital Markets, Understanding and Addressing Complexities, which will be delivered in two parts this morning and on Wednesday, January 28th, 2026. I must convey our sincere appreciation to the UN Sustainable Stock Exchange's initiatives for partnering with us on this important program, and to UN Women, the International Finance Corporation IFC, Columbia University, Bloomberg, the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, and the EDGE Certified Foundation for their invaluable contributions to the development and delivery of this training session. To our attendees from Trinidad and Tobago, our wider Caribbean, and other jurisdictions, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us over the next two sessions. Your presence here signals something very, very important, that across boards, management, teams, regulators, market intermediaries, and institutions, there is a growing recognition that gender equality is directly linked to market resilience, performance, and long-term sustainability. At the TTSE, our decision to co-host this training is part of our strategic plan to develop our financial infrastructure to be resilient, flexible, and sustainable. As an exchange, our role goes beyond providing a platform for security trading. We have a responsibility to support the development of a fair, transparent, and forward-looking capital market, one that allocates capital efficiently, manages risk appropriately, and supports sustainable economic growth. Gender equality as a UN Sustainable Development Goal number 5 is recognized globally as a material issue for capital markets. According to the World Bank, in 2024, Women in Trinidad and Tobago were estimated to form 50.6% of our total population of approximately 1.4 million, and great strides have been made closing the gender gap. Since 2025, Trinidad and Tobago has the distinction of having ladies in the position of the three highest positions in the nation. Our President, Her Excellency Christine Kangaloo, our Prime Minister, the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar, and our Leader of Opposition, the Honorable Penelope Beckles-Robinson. These are significant steps in demonstrating that women can attain the highest offices. Looking at our listed companies, according to a 2025 report produced by Seneca Consulting Trinidad and Tobago Limited, during the period 2018 and 2024, there was a steady rise in female board participation from 25.8% in 2018 to 29.9% in 2024, marking a sustained, though modest, upward trend. In the year 2021, this actually marked a significant milestone, with the average percentage of women on boards achieving a 30% benchmark for the first time during the observed period. The manufacturing and financial and non-banking finance sectors continue to lead and demonstrate stronger financial outcomes. In 2024, 8 companies achieved or surpassed the 40% threshold of women on boards, compared to 5% in 2018. These companies now serve as an example of sustained improvement. However, more than half of our listed companies continue to fall below 30%. These results underscore the need for continued focus on not only increasing female representation on boards, but also on advancing women in top-tier leadership and committee roles. This report shows that gender diversity in corporate leadership is not a straight line. It is a tug-of-war between progress, resistance, vision, and inertia. Having gender parity in capital markets expands the opportunities for growth of our economy and the betterment of our citizens. In 2015, a McKinsey Global Institute report estimated that in a full potential scenario, in which women played an identical role in labor and capital markets to that of men, as much as 28 trillion or 26% could be added to global annual GDP in 10 years. These are staggering estimates. Gender equality in capital markets means that more investors and investments could grow our capital markets and the overall economy. It makes economic sense for the long-term development of our market infrastructure to unlock growth and creativity of all persons, regardless of gender. Gender equality is now firmly embedded within the broader sustainable finance and ESG conversations. That is why exchanges around the world are taking a more active role in building market understanding and capacity in this area. Through our partnership with the UN SSE, the TTSE is committed to ensuring that our market participants, issuers, intermediaries, investors, regulators, and other stakeholders have access to international standard guidance, practical tools, and globally aligned frameworks that can be applied within our local and regional contexts. This training program is one of the initiatives in 2026 to raise the bar in our capital market on sustainability, starting our 2026 on a path of greater understanding and action. In April 2026, we are scheduling our second training sessions with the UNSSE relating to small and medium enterprises and sustainability, and by the fourth quarter of 2026, with the assistance of IDB Invest, our exchange will launch its first green bond framework for sustainable financing instruments. These are exciting initiatives which highlight how sustainable financing and practices are essential for the survival and future success of small island states like Trinidad and Tobago and our Caribbean neighbors. I encourage all participants to engage actively over the next 2 sessions to ask questions, share perspectives, and think critically about how the insights from this program can be applied within your own organization and spheres of influence. Once again, thank you to the UNSSE and all partner organizations for making this program possible, and thank you for being part of this important initiative. I wish you a productive and insightful training, and I look forward to the discussions ahead. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ava, for such a great opening to today's session. I think really sets things in context excellently for us there. And you've already raised some really interesting insights and data points for us as well to get us started with the discussion. So a big thank you again, and a big thank you to all of your team for supporting us in hosting today's session.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, well, that I think sets us, as I say, very well in context to get our session started. So, from my side now, I'll just cover a little bit of an introduction to what we're going to be talking about today and who else is joining me to talk through that material. So, today's training is really looking at the interface of gender equality and global markets. So, as many of you may already feel, gender equality and finance can be both sensitive and complex issues, as Ava's already introduced us to as well. So rather than pretending that complexity doesn't exist, what we're aiming to do in today's training and our next session on Wednesday is to better understand that complexity and identify how we move forward from it. So in today's session, we're going to be particularly looking at understanding the complexities. And in our second session, we're going to get into more action-oriented mechanisms for advancing gender equality and addressing these problems. So a couple of practical points just before we get started. So as you probably know, we've got a two-part training course with two sessions each lasting for 2 hours. And our next session together will be on Wednesday. We've got live question and answer and interaction opportunities throughout this session, so we really encourage you to make the most of that. So we would love to get your participation in a number of interactive exercises and polls we'll be doing today. So please do take part in those. We'll also be issuing completion certificates for those who take part in the two parts of our programme. So if you join us for our second session on Wednesday, we'll share instructions then about how you can get your CPD certified completion certificate as well. And another couple of quick housekeeping points. As you've probably noticed by now, as participants, you are muted, but that really doesn't mean that we don't want you to interact with the session. So it's great to see many of you already messaging in the chat to share your thoughts. So please continue to use the chat to share any general comments as we move along. If you have particular questions for us, it would be great if you could make sure to put the questions into the Q&A box that you'll also see available to you on that bottom bar of Zoom. As if you put your questions there, we can then respond directly to each question and keep track of those answers and make sure we get back to everyone. Okay, so just to say a little bit about who is delivering the training for you today. So, as you know, I'm Fiona and I'm joined by my colleague Landon, our project officer at the UNSSE team. Hi, Landon. And it isn't just us today, we're joined by lots of expert voices on this topic and from industry. So, firstly, a big thank you to Miwa Park from UN Women for joining us as well. Thanks, Miwa. And Miwa will be coming to us later in the session to talk a bit more about the UN Women's work on this topic, and particular the women's empowerment principles. And then we also have a second guest segment. Unfortunately, our speaker Eureka wasn't able to join us live today, but we have a recording of her presentation, which we'll be sharing later in the session. So Eureka will join us from Bloomberg to talk about the role of gender equality data in the work that Bloomberg do in assessing companies as well. So as I've already mentioned, we know that gender equality is a complex topic. But what we're really aiming to do is to guide you through that complexity in our training program today and to break this down into clear steps that we can take forward together. So in part one of the training, we're going to be looking at two of those steps that you'll see in this wheel diagram here. So we'll be doing firstly the prepare and align parts of our training, which are really thinking about some of the fundamental concepts around gender equality and what the different global practices and principles are that you'll want to align with. And in the second part of our training later in the week, we're going to be really digging into how to take action on this topic. So, thinking about implementation and communication. And alongside those four modules that we'll be working through together, there's two key learning objectives that we're really aiming to focus on today. So please keep these in mind, and that's really what we're focusing on achieving together today. So, firstly, we'd like to help everyone to understand why action is needed for enhanced gender equality. And secondly, to identify what the tools are that you can use to help you to enhance gender equality. Just to show you how that focus for today's session breaks down across the time we have together, we'll spend an equal amount of time on those two different segments. We'll take a little bit of a break in the middle of the session as well to refresh ourselves, and then we'll wrap up at the end with some resources and run through any of the questions that we still have to answer as well. Okay, so to get us started on this topic, firstly, we'd love to understand from all of you what you know about this topic already. And so to help us with this, we're going to be using a tool called Mentimeter, which we'll come back to a number of times during the training. So encourage you to follow the Menti link now, and we'll use that over a number of exercises. So Landon has shared the link in the chat with you to access Menti. So if you follow that link directly, that will take you through to our first question. But I'll just share my screen now as well, and that will give you another couple of ways that you can also join us in Menti as well. Great. I see lots of you coming into the Menti, so that's great. So the other ways that you have for joining us there are also to either use the code that you see at the top of the screen. So if you go to menti.com, you can also enter that code. And I will just also put up this QR code here, which you can scan if you want to join us maybe on your mobile device as well. I see lots of you have already accessed our first question, and that was really just against those different learning objectives that we set out there around, understanding the connection between gender equality and global markets, on discussing this topic with others, and taking action on gender equality in your organization. So I can see that maybe we're not feeling so confident at the moment on the connection between gender equality and finance, maybe a little bit more confident on having discussions around this, and most confident currently on taking action. So that's interesting in a way, and really positive to see that lots of you already feel confident and maybe are already taking action on this topic. So that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that with us. Really encourage you as well to share with us in the comments as we move along if you have any practical examples of maybe what you've already done in your organizations or maybe in your wider lives as well on this topic that you'd like to share with others. So feel free to let us know about that. Okay, thanks everyone. So I'll just, if you keep Menti open, we're going to be coming back very quickly to do a question shortly. So kicking off now with our first module, we're going to be thinking a little bit around the complexity of the topic and focusing on some of the key terms that we use when we're discussing gender equality. And so to get us started with that, we have another Menti question for everyone, which I'll just move on to now, which is really to get a sense of what gender equality means for you and what do you think of currently when you think of gender. So there isn't a right or wrong answer to this question, of course. And if you can only think of maybe one or two words, that's fine. Feel free to share those with us. So feel free to let us know what comes to mind for you when we think about gender, and then we'll move back into our slide presentation to look at the definition that we'll work with together, just to make sure we're all on the same page here. Okay, so I'm seeing individuality, empowered, sex, female, societal rules, identifying characteristics, social constructs, teamwork. Interesting. So I think we're getting two different perspectives here, and we'll come to the definition shortly, but maybe those who are talking about more of the fundamental characteristics of biology relating to sex, and that's female versus male. But some of you I see are highlighting some of those more socially constructed elements. So gender identity, our behaviors, our differences between us, how we express ourselves. So, yeah, maybe a few different perspectives there, and we'll come back shortly on a definition to have a look at that together. But lots of interesting ideas here, and I think already starting to show, obviously, some of the complexities and nuances to how we talk about this topic as well. Okay, brilliant. Thanks everyone who's shared there. So I think what we'll do now, feel free to keep sharing. You'll be able to see those responses coming in on Menti, but we'll go back to the slide presentation now, and I'll hand over to Landon, who's going to talk us through that definition.
Great, and good morning again, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. And as Fiona mentioned, going to quickly talk with you through now a bit of maybe the formal definition, although it seems like a lot of you already have some good ideas on defining gender already. So as mentioned, you all had some great ideas, but just so that we're on the same page, and we all understand the depth of gender, which is not simply sex or being male or female. The purpose of this initial exercise is to make sure that we all understand that gender is not the same as sex and that gender can differ in different contexts and societies. This is important because it's not really different sexes we always need when we speak about the value of diversity. It's also different ways of thinking, different life experiences or lived experiences, and different institutional restrictions or freedoms, which different genders can all have and bring to the table. So while the term gender is actually quite difficult to define because it can mean something different to all different people and in different contexts and societies, let's try to briefly get a better idea of what is included in this complex term. So with that, UN Women defines gender as the social attributes and opportunities associated with being male and female, and the relationships between women and men and girls and boys, as well as the relationships between women and those between men. So these attributes, opportunities, and relationships are socially constructed and are learned through socialization processes. They're context and time specific and also malleable or changeable. Gender determines what is expected, allowed, and valued in a woman or a man in a given context. And in most societies, there are differences and inequalities between women and men in the responsibilities assigned, activities undertaken, access to and control over resources, as well as decision-making opportunities. Gender is part of the broader socio-cultural context, and other important criteria for socio-cultural analysis. It can include class, race, poverty level, ethnic group, and age. So there's a lot of interconnected factors here. So as such, gender is not quite as simple as just male or female. Gender can be influenced and defined based on the nature of certain relationships, based on hierarchies, history, context, institutions, or norms. And most importantly, when we're discussing gender equality today, please remember we're referring to equality of the genders, not simply just increasing women on boards, although that, of course, is discussed a bit throughout. So feel free to explore this and other gender equality terms on the Gender Equality Glossary developed by the UN Women that we link to in the slides. And again, a quick reminder that the slides are available online if helpful for you. We'll dive a bit deeper now. I'm sure many of you have heard of the acronym DEI, which stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We're increasingly seeing DEI managers or even teams in organizations that focus on ensuring an organization's DEI performance. So you might ask, why not just diversity teams or just equity teams? Well, we'll dig a bit deeper into how these concepts connect, intertwine, and interact, and the importance of having all three of these terms as a full equation. Now let's start with equity. So this is ensuring there's equitable power distribution among people, and you can think of equity as providing women and men with the same microphone that amplifies their voices to the same extent so that everyone can hear them equally, which many of you might be thinking, well, this is the objective of all of DEI, isn't it? And not quite, it's just a part of the picture. So let's say, for example, that our objective is equity or equal power distribution, but there's no woman in our organization to fairly distribute power to. So there's not women to pick up the microphone and have their voices heard. That means that we also need to focus on diversity. So diversity is ensuring representation. So the act of inviting the unrepresented or underrepresented gender to join the board and then enhances the diversity of that board. So you can think of diversity as having enough seats at the table for diversity to be represented at the table. Again, differences and different lived experiences are important to organizations, which we'll also show more research on throughout these sessions. So it's not enough to have microphones at the table to make sure everyone can speak at the same volume, but you also need enough chairs so that there's a diverse group of participants at the table who can speak and are willing to speak. Now, if we just have these two, however, we can have cultural assimilation take place where we expect, for example, women to act just like the men at the table, and then we'll struggle to keep them on the board, and we won't be benefiting from the diversity that we actually aim to achieve with this initiative. So it's no good to give someone a microphone if they're not willing to speak, or alternatively, to claim by giving someone the power to speak based on their appearances alone is achieving diversity. So when the objective of diversity is to include diverse ways of thinking and diverse lived experiences. So that's why we also have the I part of DEI, which is inclusion. So inclusion refers to behaviors and the practices of making all members of an organization feel welcomed, giving them equal opportunity to connect, belong, and grow, to contribute to the organization, advance their careers, and feel comfortable and confident being their authentic selves. With that, to bring it all together with this lovely Venn diagram on the slides, we can say that diversity is being invited to the boardroom. Equity is then having the empowerment to speak at that board meeting, and inclusion is being listened to within that meeting. But of course, this goes much further than just the boardroom, and it should be considered organization-wide. The end goal of all of this then is equality, and that's where it depends on all three of these circles: diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can have diversity without equity or inclusion, and it won't be sustained. Equally, we can have equity without diversity, and we won't actually make any progress. So when we talk about equality today and in Wednesday's session, especially when we talk about the benefits it brings, remember that we're not simply looking for an equal number of men and women on, say, a corporate board or in organizations. What we really want is these three things: diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. Again, you can find a more detailed version of this diagram in your handout, but hopefully this is a good pause so that you can look a little bit more at your slides. But actually, we'll move along now and come to prepare. So we've had a chance to get a bit more clarity on some of those definitions, and we'll move into our next module. So why does gender matter? So to get started, it's important to highlight that equality between genders is indeed a human right. I think that's the base here to say. So it's widely documented that women and girls experience adverse impacts of business activities differently and often just disproportionately. They also face additional barriers in seeking access to effective remedies. And moreover, because of multiple forms of discrimination, different women and girls may be affected differently by business activities. Again, this depends on all these interconnected factors. It could be their age, color, caste, class, ethnicity, religion, depending on rural location or non-rural location, language, literacy, marital status, sexual orientation, gendered identity, if they have a disability or not, based on indigenous status, minority status. So there's so many factors and a long list of aspects that can influence how someone is treated and their lived experiences. But what that's all to say is that humans are complex beings, of course, with many elements that make up their unique identities. And as such, this is also a very complex and interconnected topic. With that, the document you see on your screen is the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, or the UNGPs, which are the global authoritative standards to prevent, mitigate, and remediate business-related adverse human rights impacts. We flagged on on this slide a few of the principles to help us understand the obligations that businesses have. The first principle we see here, Principle 14, this indicates that the responsibility of business enterprises is to respect human rights, and that applies to all enterprises, whether that's a small business or a huge MNC. So despite their size, sector, operational context, ownership, and structure, again, it's all businesses. The second principle I'll highlight here is Principle 16. This encourages businesses to express their commitment to meet their human rights responsibility through a statement of policy, and it should have certain characteristics. You can read more about that in the document on your screen, and we'll also share that in the chat, which I think Fiona just did. And I do really recommend taking a look at it if you have not already familiarized yourself with that publication. And I want to briefly mention Principle 20 that highlights that to verify whether adverse human rights impacts are being addressed, businesses should track the effectiveness of their response by using sex disaggregated data collected in line with a human rights-based approach and outcome indicators developed in consultation with the affected people and gender experts. And we'll discuss more about that in part 2 on Wednesday in our communications module. And just to note, even if the data is not made public, it's still important to disaggregate the data and to collect the data so that better decisions are made internally and so that the business can make better decisions. Finally, the last principle I'll briefly mention is Principle 21, and this highlights the important role of communication. So according to this principle, businesses should be prepared to communicate externally, particularly when concerns are raised on by or on behalf of impacted or affected stakeholders. So businesses should communicate adequately and easily accessible information to those affected stakeholders regularly. Both the information and the means of communication should be responsive to gender discrimination and the differentiated impacts experienced by women and girls. What's important to consider from a financial perspective is that in addition to being the right thing to do and a human right and having a positive impact on society, organizations should be considering the repercussions associated with violating the human rights of employees, partners, and stakeholders. So there's a policy and legal risk as well as reputational risks, which are all important risks to be considered for gender equality and social related disclosures as well. Now, moving to the next slide, it's also important to note that the sustainable development depends on equality of genders. So hopefully many of you recognize the image or imagery here as the UN SDGs or the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Gender equality is its own goal. You'll see right-hand side, one of the red ones, gender equality number 5. So gender equality is on its own. So it's one of the 17 distinct SDGs agreed to by UN member states, but gender equality also contributes to all the other 16 SDGs. So if you're not already familiar, the SDGs present an ambitious attempt to end poverty, protect the planet, and improve the lives and well-being of all of humanity. So as mentioned, SDG 5 focuses on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. But as mentioned, gender equality is really intertwined in all the targets and associated indicators of most of the SDGs. And if you want to see how gender equality links to the different SDGs, you can have a look at Annex 3 of the SSE guidance on gender equality for exchanges, which my colleague Fiona just shared. Now, some folks ask the question, what exactly does improving gender equality do for society? And there's a lot of good answers that come from this. So first, studies have shown that when we have more equality of genders in society, we also see lower levels of violence, greater economic productivity, and increased resilience against financial and environmental crises. And I want to remind you that by gender equality, we don't want to imply more women than men, but equality means that both women and men are represented, have the same level of power, and are both heard and understood equally. However, to achieve equality in many cases, that does mean we need to provide extra support to the less represented gender, which in many cases today is women. I want to give you a quick example of the extent of impact that gender inequality currently has on society in terms of an economic impact. So the study by the World Bank estimates the loss in human capital wealth, pardon me, due to gender equality is over 160 trillion. Another study concluded that the equal participation of men and women entrepreneurs could boost global GDP by 3 to 6%, which is just a huge amount. To read more about this, I recommend checking out the links in the slide in your handout. And with that, I want to come back to some additional benefits. Specifically, when we look at enterprises or companies promoting gender equality, we see a lot of positive social, environmental, economic, and business benefits. And I want to just note a few. So companies with higher levels of diversity, both gender and ethnic, at the executive level have been found to show higher performance than their less diverse counterparts on both profitability and long-term value creation measures. As well, different genders have different attitudes towards risk. So if our decision makers, like the board and leadership team, are gender diverse across an organization and programs, that can actually lead to a more balanced decision-making process. As well, something I've noted is different lived experiences, and different genders experience the world differently, and then they have different views and ideas. I also want to note companies with workplace policies that support and promote gender equality are better able to attract and retain talent. In an increasingly global and competitive workplace and marketplace, being able to attract and retain talent is, of course, so important for a successful enterprise. As well, companies with more diverse boards and senior management teams demonstrate better ESG or environmental, social, and governance performance, including having more ethical business practices, enhanced workplace and workforce policies, and stronger community relations. Now, I want to look at one of the many studies on this topic to see a bit more detail about the benefits that diverse companies are seeing. And this is from FP Analytics, an independent research and advisory division of foreign policy. The study looked at particularly at industries that are traditionally male-dominated and analyzed over 2,300 publicly listed companies around the world. And they did more than 160 in-depth one-on-one interviews and follow-up surveys. This study found that companies with more women on their board have on average a higher profit, greater transparency, and higher social ratings. And we'll look at those three stats that are on your screen here. First, on profitability, the study found that the companies with the highest percentage of women in management were, on average, almost 50% more profitable than those with the lowest. These findings are consistent with other evidence that promoting gender diversity can benefit a business's bottom line. Another study by the ILO, or International Labor Organization, and women interviewed for that study detailed how they're leading their organizations on new revenue generating paths, advancing innovation, and advocating for harm reducing practices, as well as increasing transparency to build stakeholder trust. On that note, on transparency, building trust across stakeholder groups, including employees, consumers, regulators, and investors, is vital for legacy industries that are working to evolve their business models, improve regulatory compliance and performance, and respond to consumers' changing business needs. The study found that the companies with the highest percentage of women on boards are more transparent in terms of ESG information disclosure. And in particular, companies with at least one woman on the board are 17% more transparent than those with zero female board members. Lastly, on this, I want to note on CSR, or corporate social responsibility, the analysis on the study also found a positive correlation between gender diversity on corporate boards and companies' social responsibility performance. Women interviewed for this study provided numerous firsthand accounts of their efforts to protect safety and labor rights, integrate community development into the business's strategy, and build local capacity and empower women. So there's a lot of internal impacts of diverse leadership just from that study alone. But we also discussed a few slides ago that diversity and equality can have important societal and environmental impacts. Another interesting aspect of that same study was that equality not only had an impact within the company internally, but also for the environment in which it operates. For example, more diverse boards were 39% more likely to reduce emissions. They're 46% more water efficient and 60% more energy efficient than their peers with less diverse boards. Again, in the handout, you can find a few more case studies if you want to dive deeper into this. We'll also share in the chat a recent publication that came out from IFC on gender responsive climate governance and the role of women leaders, which has some really interesting connections between gender diversity and climate change and how companies can respond and are responding to climate change. And I recommend reading that if you have an interest in climate change. With that, I'll turn it back over to Fiona.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Landon. So I think hopefully that's helped us really to see there the language around gender equality and really that purpose we're aiming for and what we're trying to achieve with equality, thinking about those different aspects of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And now to round off this first module, we're going to have a little look at the state of play currently. So where are we in terms of gender equality and progress, and where do we hope to get to as well? So that will take us back into Menti firstly to get a sense from everyone as to what you think the state of play is before we run you through some data that we've researched over recent years at the UNSSE to show the global picture on this topic. So let me reshare my screen. And as a reminder, you can follow the link, which we'll just be sharing with you shortly in the chat again. So thanks, Landon. I see you've already shared it. So you can follow that link that Landon has shared to join this question. And you can also go to menti.com and enter that code you see at the top of the screen there. So that first question that we have asked you in Menti is to test your knowledge on the current state of the market. So you can move the sliding scale here to make a guess as to when you think on the rate of current progress we will achieve gender equality globally. So your answer can be anywhere between 0 and 500 in increments of 10. So I'll give everyone else a few seconds to have a little think about that. It looks like we mostly at the moment think we're probably on track to do it within the next 50 years, I would say, for most responses. Quite a few of you have gone for 100 years, however, and then a few people going sort of more in the 200, 300 range. Probably if you haven't voted already, the size of the scale might give you a bit of a clue, but it's good to see that we're optimistic all the same. So I'll show the correct answer now. And so it's 285 years. So actually, that looks like that was above anyone's guess there. So unfortunately, indeed, it's going to still be a very long time before we'll see gender equality on the current trajectory. And this data point is according to research undertaken by UN Women, which we'll share with you in the chat as well. And so that research said, yeah, nearly 300 years based on current trajectories. And so I will note that this measure will differ based on how we measure gender equality. So, for example, the World Economic Forum also produces a report called the Global Gender Gap Report, and that indicates it could be a lower number, like 130 years. But of course, even though that's a bit more optimistic, overall, we're not seeing an indication there that equality of people based on gender will be achieved in any of our lifetimes. So clearly shows us that there is a lot of work still to do. even though, of course, there is progress. So we'll try and keep the message optimistic, but it's also important, of course, that we do understand the current state of play. And so, zoning in a little bit more now on the business context, our next question for you, and we'll come to the data with the answers on this shortly, but just to take your guess really on within your own part of the world, so you might want to answer this for Trinidad and Tobago specifically, maybe for the Caribbean region more broadly. What percentage of CEOs of listed companies in your region do you think would be women? And so you might be familiar with an American study that went viral a few years ago that indicated that there were fewer large companies run by women than by men specifically named John in the US. So a sure indicator that the glass ceiling is firmly stood in place in corporate America. And among the chief executives of S&P 500 companies, for each woman, there are four men named John, Robert, William, or James. So, in the American situation, clearly a long way to go. But what's interesting as well is to think about how we might think this could vary globally as well. So it looks like we've got a bit of a range of responses here, quite a distribution, but overall, probably quite a few of you thinking maybe somewhere in the 10 to 15% range, a spike of people thinking maybe 20%, and some thinking maybe up as high as 40% as well. And so the SSE studies that we'll talk about shortly talk about the regional picture for different parts of the world. Unfortunately, we haven't yet covered the Caribbean in our studies, but we do know in Latin America, for example, the figure could be as low as just 4%, and in the US and kind of Canada region, more like 8%. So it would be interesting if anyone's aware of any studies that have been undertaken on this in the Caribbean, but it could be in that low range of maybe something 10% or lower. But we'll dive into the data on that soon. And so the second question here, just to get a sense from you all, is also, sorry, I'll just skip through. We don't have a correct answer in there. The second question is boards. So thinking, do you think that this figure would be higher or lower in terms of the percentage of board seats that would be held by women? So just taking a guess at the same response. And as I said, we'll look a bit together shortly at the global picture on this. It looks maybe like the responses are indicating perhaps that the number of board seats could be a little bit higher. I mean, overall, still well under 50%, which I think is probably a good assumption there. But maybe the two main points being around 20 and 40%. So maybe some thinking it could be higher, some thinking maybe about the same. So good to get your guesses there. So let's now dive into the data and reveal what the global picture is on this. So for that, I'll hand back to Landon.
Great. Thanks so much, Fiona. With that, exactly, we're going to dive into some of the data. Oh, there we go. So for those of you who haven't seen these publications before, the SSE, in collaboration with IFC, UN Women, and some other partners, have worked together to provide markets with an overview or benchmark of current progress on gender in leadership of listed companies. And we'll dive a bit more into the data now. So on the screen now, you can see the first section, and this covers the G20. There we go. So we'll also share the link to this publication in the chat so you can check it out in your own time. And all these reports, of course, can be found on our publications page. And this data really can serve as a benchmark for exchanges and other relevant institutions in their efforts to promote women's full and effective participation in and equal opportunities for corporate leadership positions. We see here in this first table on the screen, it shows the average percentage of boardroom seats held by women in the G20, which is about 23%. There's an overall positive trend line, but still many countries are decreasing from the previous year. In case you can't quite see it yet, the top 5 exchanges in the G20 are in France with Euronext Paris, the UK, Italy, Australia, and the United States. It's also worth noting that France leads the leaderboard for the G20, but France has a regulatory requirement for women on boards, requiring 40% of board seats to be women. I just finished the data for this year's upcoming report, which is not yet public, but a sneak peek is that France just hit 45% this year. So even though the percentage of women on boards is among the highest in the world, I should note France's female executive leadership pipeline is not as strong. And that's why in May 2021, the French Parliament introduced a gender quota for executive leadership with 30% minimum for either gender by 2027 and 40% by 2030. But as mentioned, they've already well exceeded the 40% target for 2030 with 45% this year. So we're seeing many countries improving each year, but you can see a few that are sliding a bit backwards too, or maybe stagnating rather. I want to provide a bit more of a regional overview too, and we can see that only two regions, Europe and US CanZ, that's Australia, USA, Canada, and New Zealand, are above the 30% threshold, and that's the 30% threshold we also talk about in research, which is required for a fair power distribution. Europe, as we see, leads with 38 or 37% of board seats held by women, and that's significantly bolstered by France, where 45% of board seats in listed companies of Euronext Paris are held by women. And then, of course, US CanZ with 34%. Africa drops down to 24%. But there's a big gap between the leader and the lowest because you have South Africa, Johannesburg Exchange with 32%, and then Egypt in that group has only 12%. So huge difference. And then we have Southeastern Asia in fourth place, Eastern Asia with just 14%. And the last two places are Latin America with just 12% and Western Asia with only 7%. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do a deep dive on the Caribbean, but thankfully, I believe it was Joy at the start noted some really interesting data. I believe she noted about 30% of women in the listed companies in Trinidad and Tobago, or sorry, 30% women represented on boards. But I haven't seen that data, so hopefully I'm getting those numbers right. But it's also fantastic to hear that you also have that data, and I'd actually would love to connect with you after. I'll send you an email to see if we can get our hands on that data as well. With that, I want to discuss a bit more what you think might prevent a company in your region or beyond from advancing on these particular metrics. So sorry, I already talked through the data, so we're a few slides behind. So just give me one moment to catch up, please. Okay, sorry. So there we go. So if you can type in the chat, we'll ask you to be a bit interactive for this portion. What are the barriers facing your organization or country to advance gender equality in corporate leadership? So that could be perhaps an internal factor within your organization or company, or perhaps it's more a factor or barrier in the society you're based in, an environment you're based in. But I'd love to hear some answers. I'm sure a lot of you have some great ideas. Okay, Ria noted societal and cultural norms. Great. Yeah, that's a good answer. Ooh, a lot of culture popping up, a lot of answers coming through. Do, do, do. Disparity in the economic power, misconceptions. Oh, that's a great answer from Lisa Marie. Between balancing family life and an executive position. A lot more about culture. Societal norms. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for the answers. We'll keep moving along, but feel free to continue popping in your answers. There's a lot of great answers coming through. So in addition to the structural obstacles faced by women in the general workforce, such as unequal regulatory environments, lack of workplace flexibility, and conflicts between work and family obligations, which I think it was Lisa Marie noted, There's also specific barriers that narrow women's leadership paths and cause the drop in representation at the top. This is really where we dive into the complexities of this topic. So I'd recommend reviewing those on your own time as well. But in the meantime, let's go through a few that maybe weren't mentioned in the chat, although I think a lot of them were mentioned in the chat. One barrier or factor I didn't see mentioned was limited availability of sex disaggregated data and inconsistent reporting practices, which can make it difficult to measure progress or understand the extent of the gender gap. In turn, that can create a challenge in identifying effective interventions to close those gaps. I think this one was mentioned, but there can be a lack of training and professional development opportunities. So I won't go more into that one. I think there's a lot of good answers on that. One I'm not sure I saw too much of was lack of gender sensitive human capital management. So that can be hiring, retention, and promotion processes. So you could have non-diverse hiring committees and limited use of gender blind applications, which can lead to decisions based on biases rather than on merit and qualifications. And then failure to recruit widely for applicants or not embedding a gender lens into job postings can also reduce the number of qualified woman applicants. And then we saw a lot on this one, biases and stereotypes that should suggest women don't have the characteristics needed to lead, such as logical thinking and decisiveness, or creating a double bind in which women are expected to be nice or competent, but they can't be both. So those biases are more subtle than the norms that deliberately exclude women, but they can also be more challenging to overcome. I think we saw a lot. I think I saw a couple answers on limited access to network and connections, so that can make board and management qualified women less visible to nominating committees and to prominent men who could advocate as allies and champions. I think I saw this one pop up, but a lack of access to role models, mentors, coaches, and sponsors, which can stunt women's leadership potential. And then I do believe I saw someone pop up an answer on unsuitable work environments in traditionally male-dominated industries. For example, if there's not suitable women's locker rooms, for example, for changing out of uniforms or women's washrooms. So that's maybe not specific to women leadership, but that lack of accommodation can represent an overall deterrent to women entering a sector and progressing through the leadership ranks if those basic things aren't provided. I don't believe I saw this one mentioned, but safety concerns in operational locations and gender-based violence and harassment, and that can represent serious deterrents to women's professional advancement. So gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace and domestic and sexual violence experienced beyond the workplace can affect employees' well-being and business operations. And those experiences can lead to reduced productivity, increased absenteeism, and higher employee turnover. Can also deter women from pursuing the promotions and career development opportunities that are stepping stones to senior leadership. So that was a lot of great answers. And I want to start to summarize this part by just noting it's important to note that achieving a truly gender diverse senior leadership team and optimizing the true value in diversity, it's about more than just numbers. It's important to track those numbers like in board leadership, but it's more about sheer numbers and gaining parity and representation. The key is really about ensuring that men and women have equal voice and agency once they're in those leadership roles so that they can all contribute to determining the organization's path. But to increase the number of women leaders and prepare them to take on leadership roles, companies must truly invest in women. That means attending to the culture and purpose of their organizations, fixing problems, identifying issues, and it means adopting a more people-focused business model as part of an approach that integrates an ESG orientation into all aspects of operations. Now, if you want to dive a bit deeper, I mentioned this once or twice, gender responsive climate action. I'd recommend looking at a publication from the IFC on gender responsive climate governance. And that's the report I mentioned before that looks at why we aren't seeing the level we'd like to see. In other words, what barriers are getting in the way. Some examples of what the report find are a lack of knowledge or training on the topic, a low level of climate and gender lens literacy, and low understanding of the impacts on businesses. I think we've shared this in the chat already. Now, with that, in the first hour, I know we've already thrown a lot of information at you. So we're going to take a quick break now, I believe 5 minutes. So we'll try to throw on this calming music video. So perhaps feel free to grab a tea, coffee, or just a quick stretch. And also feel free to ask any questions you might have in the Q&A box too in the meantime. And then we'll reconvene in 5 minutes and look forward to chatting with you more then. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully, you had the chance for a quick stretch or grab a drink, and we'll continue moving along. First section was a lot about definitions and getting some initial concepts a bit more clear. So now we'll dive a bit more into the content and start with how we can enhance an organization's performance on gender equality. The objective of this next unit, Align, is to ensure that your practices align with the global best practices and standards, as well as any local or peer practices that should help guide your efforts on this topic. We'll begin by looking at the global principles that companies can use to enhance their practices on this topic, and the global standards we're discussing today are the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, or WEPs. Before we go to the principles, we wanted to get a sense of your current familiarity with the WEPs. So let us know, is your organization already a signatory of the WEPs? Yes, no, or maybe you currently don't know. And if your organization's not yet a signatory, we'll also give you some information shortly about how to become one at the end of this session. So I'll give it a few more seconds, but I see a trend here that a lot of folks don't know. If you're not sure or you don't know, I definitely encourage you to ask a colleague after this session and find out. Okay, I'll end the poll there, but unfortunately, only a few, about 7, are saying yes, that you know that your organization's a signatory of the UN WEPs. But hopefully after this session, we'll see that change. With that, to talk to us about the WEPs, we're very grateful to have with us today an expert on the principles. And as was introduced at the beginning of the session, Miwa Park is joining us from UN Women today to help provide an overview of the WEPs and as well to answer any of the questions you might have about the principles. Before she gets started, however, let's play a quick video to help introduce you to the WEPs.
Think about the impact of a signature. Think about the magnitude of a global movement. Think about the difference you can make and the power of transformative change. By signing the Women's Empowerment Principles, you can galvanize your shareholders and stakeholders to drive change in the workplace, marketplace, and community through a framework of 7 principles. Brought to you by UN Women and UN Global Compact, the Women's Empowerment Principles are a roadmap for business sustainability, innovation, and productivity. Businesses by the thousands and in every sector are becoming part of this world-changing movement to advance gender equality. Businesses that become models for attracting talent, entering new markets, serving their communities, and measurably improving the bottom line. Because gender equality means better business. Don't miss this moment to make a lasting impact on your employees, suppliers, customers, and investors. Join leading companies already on the journey to greater sustainability and growth. Commit to the Women's Empowerment Principles and make today your organization's signature moment.
Great, and with that, I'll turn it over to you, Miwa.
Thank you so much, Landon, and good morning, participants. I'm really happy to see some web signatories here and some non-signatories, and hope you can use this time with me to either refresh your memory on the webs or learn about the webs. And I've seen some comments that some of you are not sure whether your company is a web signatory or not. That information is actually publicly available on www.webs.org when you go to the company page, and I'll be happy to share that in the chat so you can see if you're a signatory or not. So moving on, I'll be very happy to walk you through the 7 principles. So let me start with the rising trend that with raising importance of ESG, many companies are realizing the importance of gender equality, as you've heard earlier with our colleagues Fiona and Landon. Yet, many company and many are unclear on how to concretely advance gender equality and women's empowerment. That's where we come in as a tool. The webs provide a holistic framework for companies focusing on the 5 pillars of action: leadership and governance, workplace, marketplace, and community, and tracking and reporting. So companies are using webs as a blueprint to position gender equality in the core business strategy, as well as through their operations and beyond. And companies join the webs community to make public commitment to gender equality and women's empowerment on a global platform and to embark on the web's journey, access tools and resources, and engage with UN women. I'll go over the 7 principles of the webs very briefly. These principles are not organized in sequences of importance, yet they're more like grouped by different pillars where it makes more logical sense. So companies are signing onto all of the 7 principles when they're joining to the webs. So the first principle is on the governance, strategy, and gender responsive leadership, which builds a foundation of the web's work. It requires the CEO's commitment and buy-in from the executive team to make gender equality a whole of organization priority. And we're not only talking about appointing more women in senior leadership here. Rather, CEOs and the executive team committing to and leading the implementation of the webs by making gender equality and women's empowerment a top strategic priority of the organization. The second, third, and fourth principles focuses on the workplace pillar, from respecting human rights, adopting or amending policies to remove discriminatory, bias, and stereotyped typical practices, to equal pay for the work of equal value, sexual harassment policies, and providing training of gender equality for all employees. Then the fifth principle focuses on the marketplace pillar. A lot of companies web signatories are working on internal changes, but we are encouraging companies to go beyond, as companies can influence their marketplace by investing in women-owned businesses, procuring from gender-responsive companies, and creating gender-responsive marketing practices and more. Then moving on, Principle 6 focuses on the role of companies in the community. So we encourage initiatives and advocacy that make a real difference in women and girls' lives. We invite companies to actively consult and engage with women and girls in local communities before rolling out initiatives, ensuring that their voices shape the process and that truly benefit from the outcomes. Lastly, Principle 7 is an underpinning principle to measure results, as what gets measured gets done. So companies are encouraged to regularly collect data to understand their progress over time. And we also encourage companies to report on webs.org in their sustainability reports and other channels. So here is a slide to show you where the web signatories are based. And this map illustrates that WEBS is a global initiative. The picture here is a little outdated as it was from September, but as of January 2026, we have CEOs from over 12,000 companies in all industry in more than 180 countries have made public commitment to the webs. And if you're interested in how many signatories Trinidad and Tobago has, again, you can visit our website and check that real time. So moving on, what does it mean to become a web signatory? So becoming a signatory is about going on a journey to achieve gender equality rather than a checkbox exercise. So the companies need to work on engaging both internal and external stakeholders and make ongoing and meaningful progress. When doing so, we encourage companies to tackle deeply rooted, systematic inequalities rather than just taking some easy road with some quick wins and ad hoc activities. The image on the slide shows the steps after committing to the webs and being accepted into the webs network. So after consideration and signing stage. So let me explain what these mean. So the activate stage is where your commitment becomes action. By developing a strong action plan with clear goals and key performance indicators, your company can turn intention into measurable progress. The steps begins with honest reflection, understanding your strength, identifying areas for growth, and addressing gaps. Through web self-assessment tools and creation of your web's action plan, you lay out the groundwork for lasting impact on gender equality across your business. Then engage is about broadening your impact. As part of your web's community, you have the opportunity to involve your employees, business partners, clients, and customers in building a gender inclusive ecosystem and value chain. By fostering dialogue and collaboration, you extend the reach of your commitment beyond your own transformative. Next stage is sustaining the progress. That means ensuring accountability by tracking result and by collecting gender statistics and gender disaggregated data. By communicating your progress, sharing experience, and reflecting on lessons learned from the activate to engaging stages, your company reinforces its commitment to gender equality and women's empowerment while inspiring others to do the same. And report. Transparency and accountability are key to sustaining progress on gender equality and women's empowerment. And by reporting on results and sharing both challenges and your successes, your company not only demonstrates impact, but also strengthens trust among your stakeholders. As you lead by example and scale your efforts, you inspire peers across industries and geographies to take action. In doing so, your company helps shape a global movement where gender equality is embedded in business practices and drives long-term transformative change. This may sound like a difficult process, but at UN Women, we offer over 200 tools and resources to guide companies on how to work on the webs. So you don't need to worry about it. But then, for those who are not a signatory yet, how can you become part of the WEBS network? So first, your company needs to be legally registered. We only accept companies from that are legally registered, but are from all sectors, sizes, and ownership types. So after you figure out if you're eligible or not, you can visit our website, then fill out and submit the application form. The form is pretty self-explanatory, but in doubt, you can find the step-by-step guidance on our website. And the Secretariat will review each application and get back to the applicant within 10 to 15 business days. So it's important to note that whatever you fill in will be reviewed and does not guarantee that you become a signatory instantly. So there are a few things I'd like to emphasize before you send your application. First, the CEO or the person with the highest decision-making authority needs to sign the CEO's statement of support. The signature date is very important as it marks a day when your company chose to take a stand for gender equality, and that date will be visible on your company's profile page. Having the endorsement of the top leadership, whether the person is called the CEO, managing director, or chairperson, ensures the commitment is not only symbolic but also backed by the influence and vision needed to drive meaningful change. Second, we invite the CEO to share a personal quote emphasizing how you will contribute concretely to gender equality. This is also an opportunity to highlight why this agenda matters to your organization and to share some actions that you're taking or planning to take. Lastly, CEO photo is also very important. We only accept professional headshot and no logo, only photo is accepted. For more information, you can visit webs.org, but I'll stay here to answer any of the questions that you might have in the Q&A box. So that was all from my side for now, but I'll come back with an example soon. So with that, I'll hand it over to Landon. Thank
Great. Thanks so much, Miwa, for that overview. And speaking of Q&A, I think someone had an interesting question I saw about tracking SDG 5 that I thought Miwa might be perfect for knowing. But with that, while we have Miwa here with us, definitely feel free to ask any other questions that might come to mind. And thank you again, Miwa. And we recommend for all of those looking for a first step on the topic that you start by working with your leadership to become signatories of the WEPs. And for those that are already WEP signatories, of which there's more and more every day, every time I check, we wanted to flag also what you can consider doing next. And this slide here highlights one of the options available, which is taking your commitment a step further by having your gender equality practices certified. So Edge provides a certifying service that can help you take your practices that additional step further. And they also provide a communication tool to show the market that you're a leading company on gender equality. And we'll also have a member of the Edge team joining us as a guest speaker at our Wednesday part 2 session, and we'll hear more about them, about Edge and the certifying process then. With that, I'll turn it back over to Fiona. You're just on mute, Fiona.
Apologies, thanks for that, Landon. Sorry, everyone, about that. So, thanks very much for that segment. That really helped us to set out the global picture. And so now we've had a look at those global scale initiative, we're going to zone in a little bit more at what could be considered based on different locations. And so, one of the key factors that should be considered, of course, is where your company is listed and where your main operations are. And as a result of that, what regulations apply for you. And so I know someone asked an interesting question about this in the Q&A already. So let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing from a regulatory perspective. So on this slide, you can see the number of different markets we have found in our research where there is some kind of gender quota or requirement set for listed companies. On the right-hand side, you can see the current status of gender diversity on the board of companies in these markets, as well as the percentage of female board chairs and CEOs, alongside what the compliance or regulatory requirement is that was implemented in that market. And what that really shows is that there is a little bit of a mixed picture to what extent there's a direct relationship between a particular regulation being implemented and us seeing that progress then in the number of women in leadership positions. And so a question we are often asked is whether or not quotas or mandatory requirements work, and if this is something that should be implemented in a country. And really, this is quite a hotly debated topic. So if you'd like to dig into this a little bit deeper, we've added a couple of extra slides that you can see in the handout, providing some more insights on this topic from a study that was undertaken by the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, all around gender-based quota policies. So do check out those resources in the handout of the presentation, which you can download from our webpage if you'd like to. But as we've already seen and discussed in the data that we've talked through together today, sometimes these policies are effective and sometimes perhaps they're not. So why is that? Well, while it's not entirely the reason, a part of this is because it really depends on how the individual companies in that country choose to implement these quotas. So what actions they take at the company level can really determine how a particular rule or regulation is interpreted and ultimately how successful it is in driving change. So we're now going to come down to that company level to see what we mean by how a company implements it and do a little bit of an exercise together. So to set up this exercise, firstly, we're going to be working with two hypothetical companies, which I'll just introduce to you now. So we'll call one of these companies Peacock PLC and the other Owl Inc. So as you probably guessed from their names, these are made-up companies, but the discussion that we'll have about their decision-making processes is based on research into real companies. And so in this case study, we see that both companies currently only have 10% women on their boards and in executive leadership. So quite a long way to go, but also not that different to that market research that we saw at the start that showed that's quite a common picture really across markets. However, although they've only got 10% of women in those executive leadership positions, both companies actually have a relatively even split of women and men in their operational level positions. So it's clear immediately that there's something going wrong here in that women aren't getting up into those higher level positions in the organizations, despite being in the wider workforce. And both organizations also have one more thing in common. They both just had a change in leadership and have had new CEOs join their organizations. And so let's say both of those CEOs are expecting a new regulation to come in. And so they want to get ahead of this mandatory rule relating to gender equality and start to make changes in their own organizations to address the needs of that requirement. And both companies have a CEO that is passionate about gender equality and they want to achieve equality in the top levels of their company and in leadership. partially so they can be included in a new gender equality index provided in the financial markets, and that will then give them exposure to new investors, but also because, of course, they do want to really drive change as well. However, what we see from this point is a departure in the approach that the companies take towards achieving that same goal. And so we're going to explore a little bit in this case study the two different approaches the companies take and how that might have influenced the results. So firstly, we'll start by looking at Peacock PLC. So as I said, these have a new CEO in the organization. And what the CEO decides to do is go with a target-led approach. So they set a bold target of 40% women in leadership positions within the next 2 years. So from 10% today to 40% in 2 years' time. And so to help reach this 40% target, the CEO makes a big announcement to staff, and they really share their own experience as a woman of climbing the ladder and using this example to encourage other women to follow her to the top too. Alongside sharing this experience, they set a hiring freeze for any men until the target is reached, unless this particular hire is approved by the CEO for some sort of extenuating circumstances. Otherwise, there's a hiring freeze on all men. So, of course, we could see a mixed reaction to this from employees. So, whilst some employees might be feeling a little bit excited about this bold strategy and maybe empowered if they're a woman that might now have new opportunities as a result of this, but of course, there's a lot of concern and worry as well. So, firstly, there will be some women perhaps who might be now scared of the pressure and feel perhaps that they need to move up the organization, or maybe they need to leave if not. And also, of course, for men in the organization, this announcement could be quite worrying. They might feel quite demotivated if they don't think that they have any progression opportunities anymore. And they may also have their own concerns about job security as well. So overall, although that CEO obviously is really trying to drive change quite quickly and taking a decisive action, we could see that there's going to be a bit of a mixed sentiment to this announcement. So looking at our second company, Owl Inc., let's see how they approached it. So Owl Inc. also has a new female CEO, and they're also very committed to gender equality in leadership positions. However, instead of the 40% target and hiring freeze that the Peacock PLC CEO took, Owl Inc. CEO decides to take quite a different approach. So they join an organization called the 30% Club. So if you're not familiar with it, the 30% Club calls on its members to commit to at least 30% female representation on their boards and executive leadership teams. And the reason 30% is seen as important is because this is the critical mass at which minority voices start to become heard. So although ultimately they want to try and surpass this 30% and achieve more, the CEO thinks that that's a good starting ambition. And they also know that they really need to get to the root cause, because at the moment they're a bit confused as to why they're not seeing women moving up the organization already. And so to help address this and understand those causes, the CEO sets up an internal task force to find out what the different barriers are that may be preventing women in the organization from climbing up. And alongside this, the CEO also initiates a reverse mentoring program. So 50% of the workforce, as we said, are women. So what is it that's stopping them from moving up the organization? And what the reverse mentoring scheme will do is allow leaders in the organization to hear from the experiences of those women within the workforce, and really hopefully then benefit from a more diverse perspective that helps them to understand what is going wrong there. Okay, so we've heard a little bit about those two approaches from the different organizations and a number of different strategies that both organizations took, some of which may be more effective than others. So what we're going to do now in Menti is have a little go at ranking those different options that you heard about there and having a think about which of those you think would be most effective. So let me just move the question on in Menti. There. So now you should have the option available to you to rank those 6 different choices that we see there based on which one you think would be the most versus the least effective. So I'll give you all a moment just to have a little bit of a think about that. Again, no right or wrong answers here. Just have a little think. What do you think personally would be likely to be most effective out of those different strategies? So I'll give everyone a few seconds to have a think. before we talk through the results. Okay. Hopefully, yes, it's working. Sorry, I just had one response. I'm getting a few more. Be great for as many of you to take part in this as possible. So please do get your votes in and then we'll discuss them together. And if you have any thoughts on why you've responded in a particular way, feel free to share those in the chat with us as well and let us know what you think your reasons are for picking maybe what's the most effective, why you would think something wouldn't be effective. Feel free to let us know. Okay. See, we're getting a few more answers in. I'll give you a few more seconds just to think that one through since we've got a little bit of time, and I think this is a helpful exercise to think through together. Okay. Give it a few more seconds and then we'll start to talk these through. Looks like we're starting to see a picture emerging of a ranking, although we're still flipping around a little bit, but I think we know what our top and our bottom ones are by the looks of it. Great. So it looks like we've started by thinking that the top and most effective, oh, it's changing just as I say it. I'll give you 1 or 2 more seconds. Okay. We're seeing the Gender Equality Task Force definitely coming out the strongest here. I can see that. Quite an equal ranking between the next three aspects around the examples and role models approach, the reverse mentoring statement, just a late stage change there I see between 3 and 4, but quite close ranking between the reverse mentoring option and the having the 40% target. And then we're seeing maybe people thinking that the 30% club and the hiring freeze, the least effective, and particularly the hiring freeze as the least effective option there. And I see a few people, thanks for sharing in the chat, people mentioning that things that focus on engagement and mentorship are probably the most impactful, and that the hiring freeze could cause a backlash or create pushback, which I think definitely we would agree with too. That may be too stark of a measure and might actually ultimately do more harm than good. So I think, as a lot of you have said, we would say that that task force is a really good starting point because clearly, unless you get to the bottom of the real root causes of the issues, you're not going to necessarily know what the actions are that you need to take to really drive lasting change. So absolutely, I think that's something we'd recommend. Of course, having those role models is great, and it's good to see since often women don't have those people to look up to, and sharing those examples can be really useful. The question between, having that 40% target versus joining the 30% club and setting sort of a floor that you want to surpass is an interesting one. I think there's a little bit of a debate there about which is the better strategy. And of course, sometimes it's also just about how these things are messaged to employees as well. We saw with that 40% target that because it was accompanied by the hiring freeze, it was probably viewed quite negatively by a lot of colleagues. But actually, if you set a target and encourage, more positive actions alongside it, maybe that could be seen in a different way. So, it's a balance of what works best for the organization and its culture, but also I think about how these things are communicated and the accompanying actions taken alongside them. So, I think that's where actually the 30% club is really focusing on that minimum threshold, as you say, to get minority voices heard in the organization, and then using that as a platform to build from. So possibly that building blocks type approach could be a good one for some organizations. And I think, as we've already discussed, we would say that a hiring freeze indeed could be quite a challenging thing to implement here. Because although, of course, it's coming from a place of wanting to take quick change and really drive improvement, you may not have gotten to the root causes of what's actually driving the advancement. And also, as well, we could see some issues between that equity part of the equation that we talked about at the beginning, because if we're taking power away from one group here and giving it to another entity or individual, that could be seen to be creating issues with equity as well, which ultimately in the long term aren't going to help drive the right culture change. Great. I'll just see a few more of your comments as well that we've had here. Clinial mentions, the hiring freeze, and then it might not be very motivational indeed. But the task force really drives the mainstreaming. I think that's a good point as well, Natalie, because you can really go through the different types of action that you then need to take across the organization. And if you have the right people in that task force to really own and get to the bottom of those issues, that will be quite key. So thanks there for sharing, everyone. Lots of really good thoughts. So I think we kind of have talked it through already, but let's now just return back to our two companies, Owlink and Peacock, to see how this could have played out for them. But I think probably you might know these conclusions. So if we go back to Peacock PLC, who we said were those ones who set the target, they implemented some helpful things around sharing examples, but maybe some less helpful ones with the hiring freeze. So what we might see as a result of this is they could see some immediate progress from setting this quota. But of course, because they haven't identified the root causes and underlying issues here, they may not have much success in promoting women and keeping them organizationally in the company as well. And also, it may be very demotivational for men in the organization because their opportunities to grow may feel like they were taken away. And also because Peacock PLC didn't stop and take a look at some of the underlying issues, there were still quite a lot of barriers in their organization that meant that women either weren't progressing or maybe didn't stay in those leadership roles. So, for example, the benefits that were available, the unconscious biases that might exist amongst their existing staff members, for example, meant really the right cultural environment wasn't there. And so as a result of this, they found that they had more vacancies and it took them longer to fill these positions as well because of the hiring freeze. And sometimes that meant perhaps the right candidate for a particular role was not selected. And that, of course, could have a negative impact on men's perception of those women in those roles as well, which obviously is not helpful either. So really the outcome from all of this was that there were negative impacts on the organizational culture, more turnover leading to less innovation and more risks for the organization. So although, of course, the CEO had good intentions, because they didn't get to those root causes, they couldn't really effectively address this issue. And okay, so let's see, what do we think that might look like for Owl Inc. instead? So of course we saw a different approach from Owl Inc., more of a focus on getting to the root causes, which of course it's important to note would have likely required Owl Inc. to invest more upfront because they would have needed to put those resources into working with their HR team, setting up the task force, etc. But what we might have seen in the reverse mentoring scheme too. But what we really see from that is a better return on investment from making those changes. The more holistic approach taken by Owl Inc. helped them to realize that if they wanted to benefit from the changes to achieve gender equality, this really needed to be accepted by the whole organization because if they tackled those specific issues but didn't drive the culture change, it wasn't going to last in the long term. And so the task force that they set up alongside the insights from their reverse mentoring program helped them to identify some specific barriers. So, for example, they were able to improve the flexibility of their working arrangements. They were able to address some of their benefit policies, which were somewhat biased. And they were able to provide more support to their female colleagues to help them, their women colleagues to help them advance in the organization. And so really what this did was help to drive the right culture in the organization to truly see the value of diversity. And as a result of this, we then saw more innovation, more new ideas coming through from these new channels they had as well within the business to share ideas. And ultimately, that drove some business benefits because they're going to have a lower resource requirement than Peacock PLC for recruitment and hiring, less turnover, and ultimately drive more innovation and beneficial culture in the organization. So hopefully, as I said, fictitious, but helpful to see how some of these different practices need to really be thought through quite carefully. And of course, it's important, I think, as a conclusion from this to see the relevance and importance of corporate culture. So, we started there by talking about the regulations that an organization can may have to comply with, and that quota could be quite a strong driver for action. But really, I think what we've shown with these two examples is that the way that a company chooses to implement these things and the actions they take to address that are really important as well. So whilst we won't go into all of these points on this slide in detail, we wanted to summarize here some of the key aspects of culture or policy that an organization might want to get under the skin of if they're looking to get to the heart of these issues. So this is a good list of actions that you could take a review of to make sure that you're really getting to those root causes of what might be driving inequality in your organization and hopefully avoiding some of those mistakes that were made by Peacock PLC. Okay, so to wrap up this section, we've just got a quick poll from you just to think about the connection then really between what we've just talked about and financial performance. So let me launch that poll for you. So this question is asking, how can a company improve its financial performance? And connecting them to some of these aspects around gender equality. So which of these things do you think will be most beneficial to the company in terms of its overall financial performance? Okay, just give everyone a few seconds to have a think about that before we share the results. I see the responses coming in. We always like to get as many people taking part in the polls as possible. So feel free to have a guess. Don't worry, there's no marks for getting things wrong in this training. It's all about giving a go and just having a reflect and think. So thanks for those who've taken part already. Okay. Great. I will close the poll there and I'll share those results with you. Okay, so we see numbers 1, 3, and 5 coming out as the strongest responses. Indeed, you all got that one correct. Those three aspects are all obviously important for organizations to drive performance on this topic. And what's important here as well is that we want all three of these things, not just one or the other, because they all really work together to tackle that equation that gives us the focus on equality. Great, thanks everyone. Okay, so that brings us on to our final segment of Align, which is all around peer practices. And so for that, I'm going to pass back over to Miwa, who's going to give us a few examples here. Thanks, Miwa.
Perfect. Thank you, Fiona, and hello again, participant. So here I'm going to share some examples of implementing the Web Spy, how web signatories have done it, so you can get some ideas and get inspired. So the first example is on the workplace pillar by a leading bank from Sweden. So they tackled their gender pay gap across its 16,000 employees in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Sweden. And to ensure fairness, the bank introduced a job evaluation system that is regularly updated and compared roles across the organizations. So this approach allowed them to measure and monitor the pay equity effectively, and the bank's initiative is backed by close monitoring and regular reporting, which has strengthened transparency and accountability. The next example is actually one of my favorite one, as it gives a lessons learned to always consult with your stakeholders and keep cultural context in mind. So this is a story about a textile manufacturer from Pakistan that invested in large amount of money to provide an on-site childcare facility for their workers to use, as majority of the factory workers were women with young children requiring childcare. Yet, they actually found out that no one was using the facility. So the company then consulted their employees and found out that the standard norm in the community was for children to stay home with the grandparents, who are the main caretakers. The company then changed its approach and instead offered childcare subsidies, which was welcomed by employees. Then moving on to marketplace examples, a financial platform based in the US had a goal to boost the amount of lending to women entrepreneurs, especially from small and medium-sized businesses, providing them greater economic resilience and independence. So the company created a specific fund that looks into improving the flow of capital to women-owned businesses and lower their cost of capital. The second example is from a group of companies from the global watch and jewelry sectors, from brand to suppliers across over 18 countries participated in a gender-responsive procurement pilot led by UN Women. So as the first industry-wide effort to embed gender equality in supply chain, the pilot mapped key gaps in the procurement. By moving from company-level pledges to collective action, the initiative sets a precedent for how whole industries can transform global supply chains to advance gender equality and women's empowerment. The companies are currently pursuing the second phase of the pilot, where we are also co-creating supplier questionnaires, code of conduct, and more tools. Moving on. So the Web Secretariat offers over 200 tools that can help you on your web's journey. So we have various case studies, templates, thematic guides, learning modules, and more that can help you to be one step closer to your gender equality goal. And here are some key web tools. So first one is the Gender Action Plan module, which is a roadmap for the process of developing a gender equality and women's empowerment action plan. In combination with the web's gender gap analysis tool, it helps the company embed gender equality into its strategy and operations. We provide a gender action plan template for those interested in creating one. Next, gender responsive recruitment checklist. It has been developed to guide companies to practice gender responsive recruitment. It can be used for your in-house HR department as well as for outsourced recruiting firms and headhunters to guide your company towards more inclusive recruitment. This tool is only available for web signatories. The next one is Gender Responsive Procurement Assessment Tool, which helps companies to advance gender equality in their marketplace by helping them assess if their procurement policies and practices are gender responsive. We encourage web signatories to use this tool themselves and to invite their suppliers to do the same, thereby amplifying its impact across the whole business ecosystem. So these tools are available for free at webs.org. So that was all from me, and I'll hand it over to Fiona. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that, Mi. You were really helpful. And of course, we'll talk a bit more about the WEPs in our next session on Wednesday as well. Brilliant. So, as we come towards the end of the session, one final thing we'd really like to do is to connect what we're saying here with its relevance to financial markets and investors as well. And so to do that, we've got a really helpful segment here from our colleague Eureka Murasawa at the Bloomberg organization. So Eureka sits within their sustainable finance and data team and really focuses all around using gender equality information from companies to assess how they're performing and look at the different risks that might present for companies. So I think a useful evidence base that this really is relevant for that investor and financial audience. So as I mentioned, unfortunately, Eureka wasn't available to join us in person today as she usually would. So we do send our apologies for that. But as this is a regular segment we do have a recording of her from a previous training that we'd like to share with you all because I think this is a really useful exercise. So I'm just giving that video a moment to buffer. And while we do, it's also worth noting that there'll be a poll that Eureka introduces during the training. So I'll launch the poll live for you today, and then we'll just move through it in line with how Eureka voices it in the session. But obviously, if the participants on the training in the recording voted differently to you, please do excuse that. But there we go. I see we're ready to go. So I'll play that video now and I'll pass over to Eureka.
Great. Thank you so much, Fiona. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I am Eureka from the Sustainable Finance Data team at Bloomberg. Today, I am excited to briefly introduce to you about the Bloomberg Gender Equality Scores, walk you through how Bloomberg scores gender, share some tools available for companies under our universe to view their broader Bloomberg ESG scores, and conclude with a short training exercise to show how data can challenge initial perceptions. So let me start by giving a brief background on the Gender Equality Scores, or G scores for short. G scores is a globally standardized reporting method designed to acquire workplace gender data. Each metric within the G score is clearly defined to ensure consistency and comparability across different markets and industries. The metrics used to assess gender equality have been carefully selected through a combination of research and internal review by our team. And importantly, the gender-related data is scraped from companies' public filings, and corporates are strongly encouraged to disclose this information to promote transparency behind the data points. So diving into the G scores taxonomy, it is broken down into three main issues: leadership, talent pipeline, equal pay, and inclusive culture. These are further split into sub-issues, which you see on the middle right-hand side, which are constructed of similar types of data fields, such as percent women on the company board, percent women in senior management, gender pay gap data, and etc. The scoring framework is structured hierarchically, where the scores are built of individual fields, which are grouped into subfields, which are further aggregated into broader issues to give you the overall gender equality score as you see at the top. Each component is evaluated on a scale from 0 to 10, with 10 representing the highest level of performance. And now I'd like you to introduce a few offerings Bloomberg provides to companies, especially to ones that do not have access to our Bloomberg terminal, and that we score for under your universe. To ensure corporates can learn, view, and challenge the Bloomberg ESG scores and associated data points that we've captured, Bloomberg has launched the ESG corporate web portal. Any company under our Bloomberg scoring universe can make an institutional account for free at the link as you see on the right. And upon logging in, corporates can gain a better understanding of the Bloomberg ESG scores, review what ESG data has been collected from companies' public filings, challenge any data points by submitting the correct value with the public report, which will be reviewed by our Bloomberg data team. Currently, this portal only supports our Bloomberg ESG scores, although we are considering to onboard the gender equality scores to the portal soon as well. In the meantime, corporates can request for a gender equality scores materiality framework to the email address that we will share later. So the materiality framework that I was mentioning earlier is something like this, which will have the granular information on the GE scores and all the input data we have captured by fiscal year. To receive this document, please request from the email address you see down below. And upon receiving this document, companies can review their score and challenge any input data point via the email to the ESG corporate contact introduced here. So now I'd like to shift gears and go over a simple case study together to give you a better idea of what all of this means and investigate how data can challenge initial perceptions. So here we will analyze two companies, Louis Vuitton, a high-profile luxury fashion brand, and Nike, a popular sportswear brand. So firstly, I'd like you to think about the company's high-level social factors at play and any biases you may have. For example, which companies may have been more advanced on their gender equality journey, which may have more policies or initiatives to promote equality in the workplace. Now let's dive deeper with the Bloomberg data, looking beyond the perceptions to see how data can drive your decision making. So here we have company A and B scores. At first glance, we see company B has a higher GE score at the top. Looking further into the issue level, we see company B has much higher leadership score, largely because of the executive section. While board level is similar, the executive portion is where company B really stands out. Some interesting underlying data is listed at the bottom as well, where it's evident that company A has slightly more women on board and committees chaired, however, falls off on executives. But company B is a bit more constant throughout all three and does better on the consistency element. Now looking at talent pipeline issue, we can see from the underlying data points at the bottom, company B is at parity, whereas company A is above parity. However, if we look at the talent pipeline score, company B is again higher. This is mostly due to company A being flagged for not disclosing data values, whereas company B is transparent for all data points. And lastly, looking at the last pillar, equal pay and inclusive culture issue, or the benefits available in that company. Again, for the overall pay and inclusive culture score, we see company B is doing slightly better than company A. For this issue, most of these data points are binary, as in yes or no, where 10 means they have a policy in place and 0 means they don't have that policy in place. So for example, if you look at the anti-sexual harassment training, Backup family care are areas we see the biggest difference, but both do not disclose much information on parental leave, which would be a big impact in this area as well. So now I'd like to take a quick poll. Please.
Apologies, everyone. It seems I can't do a poll and play you a video at the same time. So let's just take a moment to vote in the poll before I play the results and Eureka can tell you what the correct answer was. Okay. Give it a few more seconds. It looks very even, I have to say. Oh, Nike is just pulling ahead. Let's close that. And so it looks very even, as I said, but 55% of you thought Nike is company A and 45% for LV and H. So might just see if I can skip to the right point of the video for us to see that. I'll just go ahead slightly. Sorry about that, everyone.
I'll give it a few more seconds. Interesting results. I see it's kind of at par, but a little bit higher with Louis Vuitton as company A. And yes, the correct answer for this was Louis Vuitton as company A and Nike as company B. But the overall purpose of this brief exercise is to hopefully challenge some of your initial perceptions and to give insight on what data investors are looking at to make decisions. Even if a company is performing well in one area, it doesn't always necessarily mean that they're completely well advanced in gender inclusivity specifically. So I like to conclude with a powerful quote: "You can't manage what you don't measure." Highlighting the importance of more data transparency can help analyze and make improvements in the company's gender equality space by being face to face with the data. I hope you found that interesting, and if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch.
Lovely. Hopefully that was a useful exercise to do together. As I said, it's very close, but about half of you got the right answer there. But I think it also shows some of the nuances between how we assess these points. If you'd like to access Eureka's presentation or find that contact information, just to note that is available to download from the event page that we've shared with you. And we'll reshare the link again in the chat, but that's there alongside our slides as well. So feel free to contact the Bloomberg team there if you do have any questions on that. And we'll be joined live by another couple of guest speakers on Wednesday for that session as well. Okay, but as we're just wrapping up in our final moments, just to mention in Menti, there was a question just to get you to reflect on an activity that you plan to do in your organization. So I know a few of you have shared those actions already. So thank you for that. And again, I think we've had some great discussion in the chat here as well. So thanks everyone who's shared their really interesting reflections in the chat with us. I think it's great to have this simultaneous discussion and reflection on what this sounds like and means in your local context. We know in this kind of global training program, we can only cover quite a high lens version of events, but there's nuances about how this works within Trinidad and Tobago are really useful to discuss. And thank you everyone who's shared as well different resources in that context as well. That's really appreciated. So do feel free to scroll back up through the chat and make sure you've followed some of those links that our fellow attendees have shared. So thanks everyone. So I'll just move on in Menti as well. There's one last question for you there. If you're in Menti, which is just, to also let us know where your knowledge is at now on the different areas that we covered in the training. So if you have the Menti link available, please do give us a vote in Menti to let us know where your understanding is at on the areas we set out on. Useful to know for us if we feel that we've moved ahead on those. I can see some of the responses looking like mostly we've shifted the dial and feel a bit more comfortable. But in the interest of time, we'll move through and just close off the session. So firstly, just to say for the certificate, we've mentioned a couple of times, if you join us for the part 2 of the course on Wednesday, you'll get your certificate because the certification is for the 2 parts of the program together. So please make sure to come back and join us Wednesday to hear more about that. And a final thank you as we close out the session to all of our organizations who've joined us and participated in the session today. A particular thank you to Miwa for joining us from UN Women and for that presentation from Eureka at Bloomberg. And of course, a big thank you to all of the supporters of the UNSSE and the supporters in particular for this training program who you see on the screen there. Lastly, the two main thank yous from today is a big thanks to the team at TTSE for hosting us and bringing us all together here today, and of course to all of you for participating in the session. So thanks very much for your time and attention and input today, and we'll look forward to regrouping together with you on Wednesday. So have a great rest of your Monday, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll close the session there.